Just to clarify, I'm a guy, and this happened when I was in my early 20s. But before I dive into the story, let me give you a bit of background. I grew up in a pretty sheltered environment, rarely venturing outside except for grocery runs and doctor visits. I didn't even attend school. My mom thought homeschooling was the way to go. As a result, I've always been pretty socially awkward, though I've been working on it and making progress. One thing I did step out of the house for as a kid was to participate in talent competitions. I played the piano, and I still do, though I admit I'm a bit rusty these days. Once, I even had a newspaper article written about me to promote a fundraising concert I organized at my local church. I needed the funds to attend a competition 1,500 miles away. When the journalist asked me about my talent, coming from a Christian household, I replied, "It's not my talent. God let me borrow it." Fast forward to adulthood, and I was itching to break free from the confines of my sheltered upbringing and strike out on my own. I made a decision to obtain my commercial driver's license, eager to explore as much of the world as possible from behind the wheel. Despite the long hours and occasional struggle to find a decent parking spot at the end of the day, I relished every moment of it. One particular night, as I pulled into a truck stop to rest, I took my dog out for a walk. Passing by the truck parked next to mine, I noticed the driver sitting in the cab with his window rolled down. He called out to me, complimenting my dog and inquiring if he was friendly. I thanked him and explained that my dog was a bit shy around strangers, given that he spent most of his days cooped up in the truck with me, with minimal human interaction besides the occasional honk or rude gesture from impatient drivers. Yearning for some conversation, I told the driver I'd be right back. After a few minutes of settling my dog back in the truck, I returned to continue our conversation. Approaching my neighboring parking spot, I engaged in conversation with the trucker, who was comfortably seated in his chair while I perched on the top step of his truck. We exchanged stories for about 20 minutes, enjoying the chance for some human connection on the road. Then, out of the blue, he remarked that his arm had brushed against mine 7 times. It caught me off guard. I hadn't noticed at all. Looking back, I suspect he was testing my situational awareness. Brushing it off as the cold winter air numbing my senses, I accepted his invitation to continue our chat inside his truck. In hindsight, alarm bells should have been ringing in my head. But growing up in such a sheltered environment, I often overlooked subtle cues and signs of potential danger. I was too trusting, and it led me into a situation I never imagined. As we continued our conversation, it took a turn, delving into questions that felt uncomfortably personal. He probed about my phone number, my family, even my grandparents' full names. "Regrettably," I answered, though I drew the line at disclosing my address. We switched seats during our chat, him moving to the passenger side so I could sit in the driver's seat, then swapping again. But as the conversation progressed, it took a dark and eerie turn. He asked if I'd noticed that his eyes lacked color, just 2 black orbs against the whites. I later learned it's a rare condition where eyes appear black due to extremely dark brown pigment. That's when unease settled in. He delved into my childhood, and his next words chilled me to the bone. "Didn't you have a talent as a kid?" I admitted that I played the piano, and his response sent shivers down my spine. "Wouldn't that be a lie since you only borrowed it?" he asked, referencing the quote from the article. I hadn't shared that detail with him, and the city mentioned was too obscure for someone so far away to recognize. We were thousands of miles from my hometown, and I was desperate to leave. Trying to concoct an excuse to leave without raising suspicion, I declined his offer to ride with him to his next delivery, insisting on staying with my truck. He persisted, inviting me to visit him at his home, but I declined once more. After a while, I feigned the need to take my dog out again, ensuring he didn't enter my truck. As my dog finished his business, I returned to my truck, locking the doors and tilting both seats forward to make it harder for him to access if he tried. The next morning, he was nowhere to be seen, and I continued my journey, relieved to be away from him. However, a few hours later, he called me, questioning why I had tilted my seats forward the previous night. I quickly concocted a lie, telling him I tilted the seats to prevent my dog from jumping on them. I kept our conversation brief this time, and as soon as he hung up, I blocked his number. Later, I decided to change my phone number altogether. Reflecting on the encounter, I realized how lucky I was that it didn't escalate further than a creepy conversation. It served as a stark reminder to be cautious about who I engage with and where I find myself. The moral of the story is clear. Never get into a stranger's vehicle, no matter how friendly or innocent they may seem. I've learned my lesson, and I'm much more careful now.
For a decade, I've been in the trucking game, hopping between companies, chasing routes across the map. 3 years back, I found myself with a gig at a warehouse outfit in Kansas, handling shipments day in, day out. Most times, I was piloting the semi, and that's where I found myself on February 2nd, a bone-chilling Monday, the start of another hectic week. Loads needed hauling, and I was on a mission to get them there pronto. I hit the road at 3 p.m., aiming to reach my destination before nightfall. I wasn't keen on pulling over for some shut-eye by the roadside, so I may have nudged my speed a tad above the limit, pushing that semi to its limits. By midnight, fatigue was setting in hard, but the end was in sight, less than an hour away. My eyelids weighed heavy, and keeping them pried open felt like a Herculean task. I splashed some water on my face in a desperate bid to shake off the drowsiness. It helped, but only a little. With no other soul on the road but me, the darkness enveloped everything, save for the glow of my headlights slicing through the night. I'll never forget the jolt of surprise that shot through me as I reached for my water bottle, only to catch sight of a figure hurtling towards me in the distance. Panic surged, and I slammed on the brakes, bringing the truck to a shuddering halt. As the dust settled, I could make out the details of this mysterious person, standing eerily in the middle of the road. Draped in all black, with a dark scarf wound tightly around his neck, he cut a strange figure against the night. But it was his unnaturally elongated neck that sent a shiver down my spine, a detail that seemed out of place, even in the dim light. His face, obscured by shadows, remained a blur as my truck crept closer. I hesitated, hand hovering over the window crank, ready to offer assistance. But before I could utter a word, he veered sharply to the left, disappearing into the darkness of the woods. Without a second thought, I hit the gas, eager to put distance between myself and this unsettling encounter. Sometimes it's better not to dwell on the bizarre and just keep moving forward, no matter how unnerving the moment may be. I was in a hurry, so much so that it took a good 20 seconds for the full weight of the encounter to hit me. My heart kicked into overdrive as I mulled over just how strange it all was. But like most things, the moment passed, and I pushed it to the back of my mind. Just as I started to relax back into my rhythm, another curveball came hurtling my way. A blur darted across the road ahead, initially resembling a large animal. But as it disappeared into the woods, I realized it was another person. This time, I didn't hesitate. I kept my foot steady on the gas, eager to put distance between myself and whatever strangeness lurked in the shadows. Maybe I even pushed the pedal down a bit harder, just to hasten my escape. For the next few minutes, the road stretched out before me in unbroken silence, the only sound the hum of the engine and the rush of wind against the cab. But little did I know, the calm was only temporary. As exhaustion set in, I found myself drifting into the opposite lane, my eyelids heavy with weariness. With just 40 minutes of the journey left, doubt crept in. Could I push through, or was it time to find a spot to call it a night? Scanning the roadside for a suitable resting place, I stumbled upon a small gravel clearing, a makeshift rest stop of sorts. Without a second thought, I maneuvered the semi into position and reclined the seat, closing my eyes in search of much-needed rest. I hadn't even been asleep for an hour when I jolted awake, the darkness pressing in around me. Something, an instinct perhaps, nagged at me to switch on the headlights. Trusting my gut, I flicked the knob, bathing the area in a harsh glow. And there he was, standing before my truck just as he had before, the man in the black scarf. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the encounter from earlier wasn't a mere trick of the mind. He was real, and he was here, right in front of me. As his eerie smile stretched wider and his eyes bore into mine, a chill ran down my spine. Without hesitation, I fired up the truck and peeled out of that clearing, my mind racing with questions. How had he managed to traverse 10 miles in such a short span of time? It didn't make sense, and I didn't dare stop again until I reached my destination. Exhausted, I collapsed into a fitful sleep in the parking lot, hoping to put the night's events behind me. The next morning, as the sun cast its golden glow across the horizon, I couldn't shake the lingering unease. Rationalizing it all as a trick of the mind seemed the only logical explanation. But the vividness of the hallucinations, the terror they invoked, that's what still haunts me to this day.
Once upon a time, I was a foreign trucker, or at least that's how it felt. I've crisscrossed this vast country countless times, tracing highways and back roads until I thought I knew every inch like the lines on my palms. But as they say, pride comes before the fall. You see, I thought I'd seen it all. Every twist, every turn, every strange sight along the way. But oh, how wrong I was. There was something waiting for me on my last run. Something that shook me to my core. It's left me questioning my sanity, wondering if I stumbled upon a warning for us all. Not just us truckers, but anyone who calls this continent home. One thing's for sure, I'll never set foot near that cursed region again. So there I was, cruising east on Interstate 40, slicing through the New Mexico desert en route to Richmond. I'd bid farewell to Oxnard the day prior, hauling a truckload of fresh produce. It was a routine route, one I'd traveled hundreds of times before. And yet, as the second day of my journey dawned, I left the truck stop around 4:30 in the morning, the world still cloaked in darkness. I'd been behind the wheel for about an hour, the only company the hum of the engine and the stretch of empty road ahead. The pre-dawn darkness enveloped the world around me, and the road stretched out like an endless ribbon of blacktop. It was one of those desolate stretches where the land stretches flat and barren for miles on end. And then, just when I least expected it, disaster struck. A tire blew out. Now, it wasn't my first rodeo. I'd been through this song and dance before, so I knew the drill. With a steady hand, I guided the truck off the road, coming to a gentle halt. I was annoyed, sure. I took pride in keeping my rig in top-notch shape, but sometimes fate has other plans. With my hazard lights flashing, I stepped out into the chilly morning air, placing reflective markers along the shoulder. I inspected the damage, already knowing what I'd find. Sure enough, the tire was shredded, but I was prepared. I had a spare on hand, along with all the tools necessary to get the job done. I was staring down the barrel of losing a few precious hours, and the night wind was howling relentlessly, biting into my bones with its icy chill. So I paused, weighing my options. Despite having a hefty magnetic flashlight at my disposal, I decided to hold out for the sunrise. It was just around the corner, after all. While I waited, I figured a few cigarettes might take the edge off. I cracked open the passenger side door to shield myself from the relentless gusts and perched on the step, gazing out into the vast, dark expanse dotted with twinkling stars. The silence was deafening, almost oppressive. I went through several cigarettes, the glowing embers casting an eerie light on the desolate landscape. And then, in a moment of carelessness, I flicked the butts into the scrubland below, a move I'd come to regret. Without warning, a ferocious gust of wind slammed the door shut, catching me off guard and leaving me to ponder the consequences of my actions. In the blink of an eye, I found myself on the receiving end of a swift and brutal blow. With no time to react, I bore the brunt of the door's wrath square in the face. To add insult to injury, a lit cigarette dangled from my fingertips, its embers searing my lips as I futilely tried to fend off the onslaught. As I staggered onto the shoulder, nursing both physical and metaphorical wounds, I couldn't help but feel like this trip was off to a dismal start. A bitter gust of wind swept in from the northeast, as if mocking my misfortune. Turning to face the source of my irritation, I noticed something peculiar on the horizon. A figure glowing faintly amidst the darkness. Had it not been for that ethereal glow, I might never have spotted them. The mere sight sent shivers down my spine. They stood atop a slight rise in the road, a mile or two distant. Though small in stature, their presence loomed large in the obscurity of the night. Squinting against the darkness, I could just make out their form, a figure standing resolutely in the middle of the road. My heart pounded as I watched the figure raise their hand, clutching an object that gleamed in the faint light like a spear. Soon more figures emerged from the darkness, lining up beside him atop the rise, each emanating the same otherworldly glow. They brandished weapons, spears, axes, bows, signaling their intent. I stood frozen, paralyzed by fear as the army of glowing apparitions surged forward with a deafening roar. Their unnatural speed was unnerving, almost supernatural. Panic set in, and I scrambled to seek refuge in my cab, only to realize in horror that I had locked myself out, keys still dangling tantalizingly inside. Cursing my own foolishness, I turned to face the advancing horde. If this was to be my end, I resolved, I would meet it head-on, standing tall in the face of the unknown. No running, no hiding. As the impending doom closed in, I steeled myself to meet it head-on. They were mere moments, mere seconds away now, hurtling across the landscape with the fury of a tempest, their battle cries echoing in the night. In those final moments, a revelation washed over me. These were the lost souls of Native Americans, defending the land that held immeasurable significance to them, a land I saw merely as a means to an end, an endless stretch of dust and shrubs paved over without a second thought. Perhaps in some twisted way, I deserved their wrath. After all, I was the one driving over their graves time and time again. As I pondered their motive behind blowing out my tire, the first rays of dawn broke through the darkness, illuminating their hollow forms with a spectral glow. And just like that, they vanished into the desert mist, as insubstantial as the morning dew. The rush of wind that followed nearly knocked me off my feet, but I stood my ground, transfixed by the spectacle of the desert sunrise. It was then, amidst the cacophony of noise, that a passing truck shattered my reverie. For the first time in that moment, I found myself thinking, what an utterly dreadful racket.